All right, I'll go ahead and get us started. Avery will join us at some point and she'll be able to go through her lovely speech of clean your data, right? That we all love listening to. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. What I want to go over today are just some of the most common errors that I normally see. Oh, let me admit all here. Great. What I wanted to cover with you all today were some of the most common data quality errors that we typically notice in HMIS during our internal monthly review. So this is anything ranging from like social securities, households, and just some key areas in HMIS that you want to pay attention to, or let staff know to pay attention to those fields because they really do matter. Especially when it comes to clients being qualified for certain programs and making sure that they don't have to be referred a second time or a third time just because they didn't quite qualify for the first referral that they went through. Let me share my screen and let's get started here. Okay. HMIS will probably look a little bit different for everyone today just because of updates from HUD. So if you're seeing that gender field looking a little bit different, then that's exactly what it's coming from. It's from the new data standards that went live today. I can't wait to share the screen today. Ooh. There we go. Okay, everyone should be able to see our service point training site right here. And let me know if that's not the case. Something went wrong horribly somewhere. And there we go. So what I'm going to go through now is I'm going to go into Client Point and find one of our test clients. And you'll see this is the kind of that gender area that I mentioned before that looks a little bit different. I want to find our client named Jennifer Smith. And we're going to click search. And there's Jennifer. Okay. Right. One of the first things that I want to mention to everyone is households, right? So households are one of those key areas in HMIS where you really want to make sure your household is set up correctly from the very beginning so that it makes it a lot easier whenever you're creating your release of information or when you're adding your entry and services and stuff like that. You want to make sure that your household is accurate before you move on. One thing to note is that after you've created an entry, for example, or even a service, and in this case, you'll see we have our HLA demo project here. Right. If I open this, you'll see that it currently has this household number 32 right here, and this couple with no children, and it has Jennifer and John in that household. You might notice if you scroll down here, this is the household that we're working with, this 32, but this client in our training site also is associated to this ID number 33 and 34. And if we wanted to, let's say, add Jessica or Johnny, right, to this entry, you might think you could just click include additional household members, but it doesn't show you the other household members. Let me bring this over here. Yep. So it doesn't show you the other household members that are outside of this ID. So this entry is pretty much stuck to this ID right here. So if you're looking to try and change this later on, because maybe you picked the wrong household or You may have realized later on that, okay, there should have been an extra person added to that household. You want to make sure that if you're making an addition, that it has to be that same household ID number. And if you pick the completely wrong household from the very beginning, then this entry would have to be removed from every single person in the household. And then you'll have to re-add that entry with the correct household ID. Okay, this is why I always try to tell our end users that if you're working with a household and you look at HMIS and you see that it's not quite the same, it's always best to just kind of start your own, right? Your own perfect household that you're working with. And that way you'll know exactly who to use. You don't have to try and, click on individual clients. You could just click that checkbox that selects everyone because you know that you kind of did your due diligence at the very beginning. So that's one thing about households, and this also applies to services as well, is if you have a service that's attached to that household ID and you realize that it was either supposed to be a different household or someone else was supposed to be added to that, you won't be able to add additional household members from other household IDs. So keep that in mind if you're looking to either enter data in HMIS or if you're looking to clean up data as well. So let's go inside the entry. Okay. And the next thing I want to talk about is this relationships ahead of household field. Right? It's on every single profiles intake assessment, and starting I believe this fiscal year, this field is going to be a requirement for every single person in the household, so you won't actually be able to leave the screen without answering it. One thing to keep in mind is there should only be one head of household identified for a particular family. So the best way that I've found to kind of cycle through these household members and making sure that only one person is selected is, right now we're under Jennifer Smith's profile, and you can see that up here at the top because Jennifer's is a kind of a blue color. So we could go ahead and let's say Jennifer is listed as the head of household, so we could update her field. If you head on over to John, okay, you'll notice that John doesn't have any fields. John was just added to the system. And this is where you can verify that, okay, this person is supposed to be the head of household, spouse or partner. Okay, and you do want to make sure that you're paying attention. If you have a household of 5 people, just cycle through, each person when you get to this field. So that way you can just make sure that one person is selected as the head of household. This is one of those really common errors that I've noticed is there are either 2 head of households identified or there are none, right? So you want to make sure that you're kind of going back and going through each profile and updating that relationship to head of household status. Okay. I head on back to Jennifer's profile. This time you'll see that you'll get this encouraged answer alert. And HMIS does try its best to let you know if there are some fields that weren't answered. And so this is one of those things that you'll come across as these little answer alerts, and it'll list you a couple different fields like, hey, you missed these. You might want to go back and check on this. And this is something staff should really pay attention to. If they miss something, you'll get an encouraged answer alert. Don't ignore it. Just, you could always click, yes, you do want to answer those questions, and then go ahead and fill them out before switching over to the next person. The next fields that we'll see are usually chronically homeless errors. So from chronically homeless, there isn't a particular question that says, is this client chronically homeless? There are a certain list of questions that are asked, and depending on how users answer them, that is what will determine if the client is considered chronically homeless or not. And so from here, you'll be able to see we have that approximate date homelessness started field. This question right here, the number of times they've been in the streets, shelter, or safe haven in the last 3 years, and then their total number of months homeless in the streets. This approximate date homelessness started question is just asking for when the date the client became continuously homeless. So if, for example, you might be talking to the client, they tell you that they've been homeless since February, for example, and then with some more conversation, you find out that back in April, they actually spent a week with a friend, and couch surfing under HUD's definition is not considered homeless. So because they stayed that week, okay, 7 or more days in a non-homeless situation, then this counter for that approximate date homelessness started field resets. Okay, so in this case, then the approximate date homelessness started should actually have been that April date and not the February date, right? So we always want to make sure that we're kind of updating these fields and making sure that we're picking an appropriate time. Okay, so let's go ahead. You can always click the calendar button to open up a little calendar view for you to look at. And this question, this number of times the client's been on a street, shelter, or safe haven in the last 3 years, this is actually asking for instances where there's been a break in between. So again, a break of 7 or more days, and that's where you would want to kind of start your count, okay? This goes up to 4 or more times, and kind of similar to this question here, this total number of months homeless, this is just asking for a total number of months. And once you get to 4 or more times, you don't really go any higher than that. Making sure that you're not picking that data not collected option. It's listed in a lot of different areas in HMIS, but this really doesn't give us any accurate or usable data. So make sure that you're not picking this bottom option down here. And the last thing to keep in mind with these fields is you never want to go backwards. So if you're going through an intake with a client and they give you an approximate date homelessness started that's before this 8/25 date, you don't want to go backwards. So as long as they give you, in this case, an 8/26 date or more recently, that's when you would want to update this. And this applies to all 3 of these fields. We never want to go backwards. All right. And the next thing I want to cover with all of you before I hand it over to Avery here is this income portion. This income section, you'll notice that there is this drop down, this income from any source area. And I know it's a little hard to see with that kind of gray on white on gray background, but this is really important, especially for reporting purposes, because this field needs to match what's inside HUD verification. What do I mean by that is this HUD verification button right here on the top right. Right, so if this says yes, inside HUD verification, at least one of these source of incomes should be listed as yes. Okay, and this applies to all 4 of the HUD verification sections. So you'll see non-cash benefits also has its own drop down. And you can always click on HUD verification to get a quick snapshot of what is currently listed. Same thing with health insurance. Also, it has that yes or no. And then in HUD verification, you can always double check, right? So you want to make sure if you're adding an entry, right, you're enrolling a client into your project, that as you're scrolling down and answering these, you might look at this and say, okay, it says no. And that's accurate. The client's not receiving any non-cash benefits, but you have to make sure to double check with HUD verification. You can't just take this drop down at face value. And same thing with that disabling condition. Sometimes this question is listed right on top of the disabilities HUD verification, and sometimes it's listed at the top. So depending on which program you're enrolling them into, this question might not always be in the same place. But again, it's still just as important. You have to make sure this yes or no matches with what is inside HUD verification here. Okay. And these are some of our common errors in HMIS. And with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen and pass it on over to Avery.
Okay, thank you. Happy Friday, everybody. Yay. Yay.
Okay, I do not have any fancy PowerPoints for you today. I know everybody is sighing and you're all extremely disappointed about that. But I wanted to have a conversation, and I wanted to have not just conversation, but a whole discussion with you all about why it's so important for us to have the data quality in HMIS. HMIS really needs to become a tool that's utilized by the entire continuum of care. A tool not just to say, where are we at with our benchmarks, our system performance measures? A tool not just to show funders, where there's gaps, where more services is needed, but it really needs to become a tool for the end user, for the case manager, in order to capture the client's story. This is really important because when our clients come to us, they are in distress. They are experiencing trauma of homelessness on top of all the other trauma that they may have experienced in their life. And therefore, getting the client's story does not always come very easily. Then again, you also have projects that have to be in and out of that client's life. And so therefore, the only way they can get that story is to see where they have been. And that's what HMIS should be telling us. So I know you've heard it before, quality over quantity, right? Well, this can apply to data management for HMIS. When it comes to our homeless service data, whether it is anything from a street outreach worker to working with somebody at a meal site. Okay, the data quality is essential because it does create the meaningful reports. It does direct new initiatives, but most importantly, it protects the safety of your clients. It does that because it is a secure location to put that story in to tell what has happened with the client. Right? I am completely over with negativity. So therefore, I am replacing garbage in with garbage out with quality in and quality out. And so if you ever hear me talking about garbage when it comes to data, call me out on it. Because that's where we want to focus. It's quality. The reason why it's quality in and quality out, because that's actionable. That's insight that we can take action on. We know what we're looking for there. We are looking for quality data. And when we don't have it, we need to stop thinking about the fact that, oh, a funder's going to be really upset because I'm not meeting an outcome because I made a data quality error, or, oh, we might not get funded because of that. Those are important, but notice I didn't start with that this time around. When I usually talk about data quality, I begin with that. I'm not, because I want to hit you where it hurts. When it comes to data quality, it has a direct correlation to client care implications. So the errors don't just impact system performance, but they have that direct consequence. And I want you to think about it. You've got a client that's sitting in emergency shelter. The ISPDAT was done when it was needed to be, but it was not entered into HMIS for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whenever we got to it. That meant that client was sitting in shelter for a week, 2 weeks, whenever you got to it, and they were not enrolled in coordinated entry, which means no housing provider could touch that client and help and assist. We are in unprecedented times right now. The money flow coming from CARES Act funding is overwhelming. We cannot keep up. So therefore, we got to move people in and out of our system quickly. And we can't have people sitting in shelter for that long. It's not fair. It's not fair to those individuals that are there and have said, I want help. Think about not updating annual income. That's the number one thing I come across when I'm reviewing the HUD projects. Number one, across the board, the one thing I'm gonna say as a finding is you're not updating that annual income. That does not reflect the work of your case managers. And that's sad because they work so hard. I mean, they work to the bone for these clients. It doesn't show when you don't update that client and that case manager worked hand in hand together for months on a goal to connect to workforce development, and they did it. And that client got employed, not just got employed, but found a career. And yet the income is still from 2018. Not updating a field for chronicity because it was done last year. Or the little box is still green. It's not red yet. Yet that client's life has changed. They now have become chronically homeless, but without updating that, we don't know that when it's on the by name list. And why is it important to know that when we're on the by name list? What if there's a tie with the score? We need to know that for our tiebreakers, to know who gets housed first and who doesn't. So the data quality is imperative to our client care, and it's vitally important to our success and to your success. HUD monitors us on data quality. And I say it over and over again. You might say, I'm not HUD funded. Well, if you ever receive ESG funding, CDBG funding, guess what? You're HUD funded. And it also doesn't matter because HUD looks at everything we do because we are a continuum. We are one. So what one does within the one impacts all. They look at it 3 different ways a year. Our annual performance reports, our longitudinal system analysis, that's the LSA, and through our NOFO. So if we lose funding because of data quality, which we have in the past, that makes competition for local funding more. That's my soapbox. I'm going to mute myself so I can choke some more, but I want to hear from all of you. What are your thoughts about data quality?
And please feel free to unmute. You should all be able to unmute yourself to ask, questions, share your thoughts, comments, concerns, anything like that.
This is E. Also the people. I think it's very important for the data quality that we make sure that we have correct data in the HMIS. And also I believe that training will be needed because even I'm the user for HMIS for a long time. I mean, that's some area that I still have a question with. So it's good that you guys have some trainings going on, but I think this is need a more constant training for all the staff, for the end user for HMIS system, because sometimes news coming or something change, and then in order to keep update with all the information we need. So
Yeah, I love that. I thank you. Thank you for sharing. I love that.
No problem.
Let me ask this question of you all. Is there something within HMIS that we should be looking at for data quality. Currently, we just look at, those uniform data elements. That's what's been benchmarked. That's what the board will look at when they look at data quality. But your data system and performance committee wants us to branch out and wants us to actually do some benchmarking for the continuum that will make a difference and that will really show the hard dedication of your projects when it comes to quality of data. So is there something that you would recommend we look at and we recommend as a quality benchmark?
I don't know if it's a quality benchmark, but I think the number of people served with the different interventions across the whole COC could be a starting point. Even if you looked at, number of individuals served in each intervention per month over a 12-month period, I think that you would be able to see the ebbs and flows in different interventions, right? And could correlate that with where our COC is at and what challenges our community is facing. I think it'd be interesting to see if there was a higher time of services delivered for street outreach, or if there was a higher time for emergency shelter, or even intervention, like diversion and prevention. If there's a higher period of time over the last 12 months where there was more people that were impacted with more people that were served with diversion and prevention types of funds available.
I like that, Heather, and I say that we go a step further, which is something that HMIS Brian is working on right now for the continuum of care. It's not enough just to know the number of people in there, but we need to know the people in there. So we need to break that down by race. We need to break that down by ethnicity. We need to break that down by gender, by age, family versus individual. And you're right. Can we see some patterns? Can we see some trends? Cindy and I did that years ago when we first came on board. And we noticed some really strange patterns. And nobody had any real explanations for it. Now, when we looked at income flows, what we found was that in the months where tax returns were coming back, that's where you saw a much lower inflow. And that made sense to tie those things together. But there were other years when we're going, oh, you're right. Us looking at that, it's going to give us that input, because then we go back to you all and say, what on earth was going on May? And that's when you guys say, oh, this new funding came out. Or, oh, this crisis happened. A trailer park closed. That's why street outreach is so high. That's why prevention is so high, that kind of thing.
Hi, it's Cindy. I just want to add to that too, that with the pandemic, it's really skewed things a lot. It's kind of hard for us to gauge right now because it dumped. So, the nice little curve we saw going down has kind of like dumped. And now we're trying to figure out, where did everybody go during the pandemic? Because they certainly weren't in our system. So we do look at patterns and trends, and we do have the counts of all of those that are served by month in our newsletter. But I agree, it's nice to see during internal data review, like all of the trends that might be occurring or the positive things that are occurring within the continuum, because, while people are getting trained, things are looking better, certifications getting done. So we're seeing a lot more clean data right now, and that's awesome.
I was on mute. So what I would say, right, is different people have different looks about data and performance. And it's interesting because, like Cindy, you just said, where did the people go during the pandemic? Like, they weren't in our system. They weren't represented with, street outreach touches or whatnot. So that exact statement to me is like, well, did the people disappear or did the workers disappear? Did the people that were out in the community working with the population, like, were they home? Were they doing telehealth stuff? And that's, that was just something that popped in my head, right? And it's a completely different way to look at that same data set. And I think that when you have different perspectives, and you talk through data and system performance, right, about different numbers, different people from different parts of the system are going to have like striking comments about the same data that, one person singularly wouldn't have thought of, but we're just together as, or stronger as a whole.
Mhm. That's right, Heather. Absolutely. Absolutely.
As far as something you had asked, like what we could do better with, I think that was either said by Ganael or Avery. I think one thing that I've run into over the last month or so has been people that change from category 1 homelessness to at risk of homelessness. And I'm unclear as to how we capture that change in HMIS. So we have families, right, that are served in rapid rehousing, and once they become housed, I noticed that face sheet and the client profile still says at risk of homeless, or excuse me, still says category 1 homeless. But I thought after you become housed, that would change to at risk of homelessness.
So from what I'm seeing through the entry, Heather, and also through doing interim updates to try and update statuses, is that in looking through like some of the data standards, that's not actually something you capture through updates. Usually it's by their destination, right? So if they exited from the program heading into, rental by client, then that's kind of where that logic comes in. About, okay, are they still homeless or not homeless? Because you just said they're going into a rental with no subsidy, right? So maybe that is something we could look more into, is how to actually track what their housing status is throughout their whole journey, really, through the system.
Is my interpretation of that wrong though? Like when somebody's category 1 homeless and they are housed by a rapid rehousing provider, does that status change at the point that they're housed?
Heather, it's a really interesting question, and I can't give you a very specific answer right now, but I can write it down to get back to you on. It really does depend upon that funder. That is one thing that it does depend on. I know HUD has a really specific guideline for it, and off the top of my head, I don't have it, but I know it's in my files and I've got it because Dominique's asked me about it repeatedly before. So I will look for it and send it out to you.
Any other thoughts or comments? Thank you so much to everyone who's already contributed. It's awesome. But this is kind of...
Thank you.
Yes, Alex.
I just wanted to say thank you because I keep telling my team that we can strive for 100% A. Like we really can do it because we not only owe it to our clients and to our funders, but I think we owe it to ourselves. We all do such good work every single day that our data really should reflect that. So quality in, quality out is a line that I'm totally stealing. So thank you, Avery, and thank you, Maya.
Thank you, everyone. Well, if anybody has ideas about quality and how to help and how to get the word out about it, even to the Data System Performance Committee, I know that Brian's taking suggestions right now, so you can shoot it to him. I think it's via help desk. If I'm wrong about that, I will be corrected.
No,
you can
right.
you can also shoot some over to me too.
So I have one question. So I noticed that a lot of social security number is missing or it's just partial. I just want to know, like, I know it's you had to be at the administrative level to fix to put a full social security number on there. So I just say, is there a way that we can get because sometimes that we know I had to fix the data, check, collect things. So I was wondering if something like we can get access to, we can be able to put a social security number on our own, so to make it easier, or it's had to be, authorized person to do the change for the social security number.
Yeah, that's actually a really great question, Yi. Currently, the way it works in HMIS for updating their client information, like social, date of birth, stuff like that, is that if you're not the person who created the record, then you can't make changes to it. So if you have, a list of folks and in HMIS, they have partial social security numbers or it's just blank, right? It's just missing. You can always send us a ticket, right? If you have like 10 people to update, you can send us a ticket with all 10, just give us the HMIS ID number and then what it needs to be updated to. And then we can go in and make that fix and just let you know once everything's all taken care of.
So is Getty sent to you or sent to Brian for the social security number?
It would be through our help desk, and I can actually put a link to that in chat.
I have a help link. I know what, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, especially with social security numbers, that's huge. Definitely use the help desk because it keeps it safe. Gelatina is asking a question.
I was just making a statement that I do agree with what everyone's saying about the importance of us accurately entering information, especially even getting cases transferred from other people. Like, it's important that we fix things as soon as we get the case and know what's going on so it reflects what we're doing. Another thing I would like to add is it would definitely be helpful. I know in my previous employment, the trainings were coming like in the middle of so much going on, and this time I was finally able to accurately, like, I finally understand HMIS because I was able to be fully trained prior to being thrown into other things. So that's important for new people that are coming on because it's so much better to teach someone something before teaching them how to fix it. So thank you.
Thank you, Calatina. That's a great statement. It is hard to kind of gauge and tell, from when the training's scheduled to like what they're actually doing at their workplace, and do they have client cases, or maybe they're not going to be using everything in the training, but they don't really know what to focus on. But no, thank you. That's a great statement. All right. Any other thoughts or comments? Thank you all so much for pointing stuff out, mentioning you with your questions. Heather, your thoughts. Just thank you all so much for your comments. It's been really nice. We've always really wanted to hear feedback from our providers and our end users. So it's always great whenever I see thoughts in the chat and people asking questions and stuff like that.
Anyone else have any more questions? Now's your turn. It doesn't have to be about households, it could be about just about anything. If you're struggling with anything, looking at reports and not knowing how to interpret it in a certain way. Well, Ganiel, and Avery, it looks like no one has any more questions, so.
Yeah, if no one has any questions right now, or if you think of